Welcome to our final chapter. You should be proud that you've made it through, and we are at the end of the line in that we've hit our final chapter looking at theories. So, this chapter, chapter 9, focuses on developmental theories, life course, propensity, and trajectory. And it's fitting that we choose this chapter and these set of theories to close out our block on theories because as we've looked at the various theories we've gone over, rational choice theory, how an individual will weigh the pros and cons, the benefits to the costs, the risks to the rewards of committing crime. Or we had trait theories. An abnormal psychological trait causes a person to engage in crime. That could have been some brain injury, mental illness, something. We talked about social structure theory, such as social disorganization theory, and broken windows theory, even strain theory, how sometimes those social structures, the neighborhood, the ecological makeup of a society can produce criminality. Then we shifted gears to social process theories, looking at three primary social process theories. Social learning theory, how individuals learn behavior and they learn criminality much the same way as people learn anything else. Social control theory, what are the bonds that you have? What keeps you from engaging in crime? Every one of us can think about the things that keeps us from engaging in crime. And then, of course, lastly, we have social reaction labeling theory, that criminals will carry on or believe that having the label of being a criminal or being a whatever is why they engage in that behavior. Of course, we did pause and look at social conflict and critical criminology and some theories that make up that discipline, but we're ending off here because if a person is going to engage in criminality, we have to understand that there's going to be multiple pathways to engage in criminality, and that's how we're going to close and conclude this block of criminal theories. And then when we come back on our fourth module, as we kind of get ready to wrap everything up, we'll go back to some more specialized topics, more specialized topics within criminology, particularly as some offenses, so interpersonal violence, political crime and terrorism, cyber crimes, and then public order crimes. So, what are our foundations of developmental theory? Well, Sheldon and Eleanor Gluck, they form the basis of today's developmental approach. Uh, what the Glucks wanted to look at is how does an individual engage in criminal behavior, and more importantly, what paths do they take? Is there more than one pathway to criminality? Is there more than one path to engaging in crime or criminal behavior? And that's what they really wanted to focus on. Now, in the 1990s, Sampson and Lobb, they used statistical analysis to re-examine Gluck's research. And then we also have Wolfgang's Philadelphia cohort that sparked interest in examining criminal career development. And then Lauber and LeBlanc challenged criminologists to answer questions about the evolution of criminal careers. In other words, as a criminologist, can we start questioning whether or not a criminal career is so defined? If an individual is on the pathway to a long-term criminal career, can they get off that pathway? What are some of the methods they can use to get off of it? Or do others start to get on the pathway later in life and then they begin a career in criminality? So all of these really challenge whether or not developmental theories are applicable today. And in looking at developmental theories, generally speaking, there's three interdependent yet interrelated views, right? First one is the life course theory. This is a theory that focuses on changes in criminality over the life course. It's brought about by shifts in experience and life events. So imagine how a person might lose their mind because they lost everything. Maybe they lost their job, lost their spouse, lost their loved ones, whatever. And for them, due to the life course and the changes in their life, that also is going to produce a change in criminality or could turn them into a life of crime. Then we also have the propensity theory. This is the view that a stable, unchanging feature, characteristic, property, or condition, such as impulsive personality, makes some people crime prone. Latent trait is a hidden trait. So there's this latent or hidden trait. Like, what do you have inside you that's a hidden trait that might make you crime prone, right? This stable, unchanging feature could be anything. It could be you have a mean temper. It could be you have a deceptive personality, whatever, but you're doing a good job hiding it. But eventually, this will make a person more likely to engage in crime. And then lastly, we have trajectory theory. This is the view that there are multiple independent paths to a criminal career and that there are different types and classes of offenders. When we think about multiple and independent paths to a criminal career, think about what you saw in the title slide of the lecture. You have multiple paths, you come to a fork in the road. Maybe for some people they turn right and they engage in criminality and then they get off that path, or they turn left and they're doing well, but then something happens and then they engage in criminality and crime. But either way, there's not just one defined path. For example, just because you grew up in a poor home or a poor environment doesn't mean you're going to automatically engage in crime. It doesn't mean that, right? The same goes for just because you had a traumatic event in your life doesn't mean you're going to become a criminal or engage in crime. So that's what this view means. Multiple independent paths to a criminal career, and there's different types of and classes of offenders, which we'll get to. So again, I just kind of want to show you the concept summary of these three theories. For life course theory, people have multiple traits. They're social, they're psychological, they're economic. People can change. Like, anyone can change. Who you are today doesn't mean who you'll be in the next 5, 10, 15 years, right? Who you are today doesn't mean what you were, a year ago, right? People absolutely can change. And what can cause your changes? Well, your family, your jobs, your peers, all of those influence behaviors. When we look at propensity theory or latent trait theory, which is the hidden trait, people don't change. A lot of us can be set in our ways. For some of us, we always have this type of action or personality. Changing is a big step, right? Because we have a master trait, because we have a certain makeup. So making changes is not likely, it's not possible in some instances. And then even trajectory theory. There is more than one path to a criminal career, and there are different types of offenders and offending. So these are the concepts behind developmental theories. And we're going to continue to look at additional concepts within this theory because it is a great way to explain criminality. Even though we have rational choice theory and we have strain and we have social disorganization, etc., it's still a great way to understand that. Sometimes just choices alone can be the difference between why someone engages in crime and why they don't. And when we say choices, we mean based on their development. Now, what are the similarities between the three and the differences? Well, for the similarities, obviously it's focusing on a criminal career. We're not talking about an isolated incident. We're talking about a career criminal. Like, you may have heard of the career criminal. This is a person that's been in and out of jail. They break the law. That's all they know. In fact, they're so institutionalized, class, that when they get out of prison, they literally don't know what to do with themselves. And probably within about a week, maybe a little less, they're back in jail because they need that structure of jail, of prison, to kind of keep them on the right path. So criminality is viewed as a path rather than an event. Criminal careers are enduring. In other words, they start in adolescence and they continue into adulthood. So you don't just like, hey, I wake up today and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to be a criminal. I'm going to start breaking the law, robbing people, whatever. No, it's an enduring process. It starts early and it continues. And then there's other factors that lead to it. Now, the differences, which will help us understand the three. First of all, when we look at life course, people are constantly evolving and so is their criminal behavior. So with life course, you can change. A lot of times people don't want to change because we get to the next point, propensity, that master trait, that latent trait, that hidden trait that most of the time we won't ever change. But for the most part, when we go back to life course, People are constantly evolving. We always are changing, right? Who you are today, if you're 22 years old, you're not going to be the same when you're 32. You're not going to be the same when you're 42. You're not going to be the same when you're 52, right? Like where you are in your life today is not where you are going to be in your life in the next 10 years or where you may have been 10 years ago. And then, of course, we have trajectory, right? There is more than one path to crime and more than one crime-producing trait. So let's talk about population heterogeneity versus state dependence. When we look at population heterogeneity, this is where the propensity to commit crime is stable over the life course. People can differ in their behavior choices. In other words, think about how some people are hot-headed, even-tempered, violent. They have a great propensity to commit crime, but others are reasonable. They can listen to the choice of reason. They can be the voice of reason. They don't get flustered or ruffled pretty easily, and they can be even law-abiding. Now, one of the key takeaways with population heterogeneity is that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. In other words, yes, people can affect their environment, but having said that, the best predictor of what's going to happen in the future is what happens in the past. If you're with a person who was a habitual liar, I'm just saying as an example, and then something happens and they tell you, I know this didn't happen, I know this didn't happen. Well, if you know they're a habitual liar, you're going to believe that whatever they said wasn't true. They could be telling the truth, but you're going by what they did in the past because their past behavior was that they were always a liar. They were always dishonest. They were always, unfaithful or not being able to be trusted, whatever. So the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. When looking at state dependence, the propensity to commit crime is constantly changing and developing as a person matures. So think about how life events have a significant influence on future behavior. What are the life events that occur or have occurred in your life? For example, let's just say you had a child that saw their parent getting brutally beaten by their other parent. Well, that's a life event that's going to absolutely influence future behavior because they may grow up hating and resenting that parent, and they may think one day I'm going to get my revenge. Or they might just think, you know what, that's okay behavior because witnessing that to my own family member says that it's okay to do it to people in the street who are not my family members, right? So life events do play a significant role in future behavior. So the population heterogeneity, the best predictor of future behavior is what happened in the past. State dependence, life events have a significant influence on future behavior. And listen, positive experience can absolutely help someone who's troubled. If you're having tough encounters, if you are potentially looking at a criminality, so to speak, having positive experiences can maybe persuade the person from continuing on that path, right? So yes, damaging, dangerous encounters can increase the likelihood of getting in trouble and having future criminal involvement. However, the belief is that having positive experiences, positive encounters, that can absolutely help a person try to avoid criminal behavior. And positive encounters can be anything, a mentor, being involved in sports, getting a job, whatever, because we're trying to have a life event change potential future criminal behavior. So we want to look at the age of onset. And this is the view that kids who begin engaging in antisocial behaviors at a very early age are the ones most at risk for a criminal career. So I don't know if you knew this, but I want to give you a did you know fact. Studies within the juvenile justice system found that many incarcerated youths began their offending careers very early in life, and that a significant number had engaged in substance abuse before the age of 10. So substance abuse is real. Substance use as well is also real. And kids, especially a majority of kids, I want to say it's something like either 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, juvenile or young people in the juvenile justice system have engaged in substance abuse before the age of 10. That's a heavy number. If we're talking 70-80% of the kids in that system having engaged in substance abuse, I mean, it's noteworthy, right? And this is what this age of onset looks at. You know, if they're going to engage in dangerous antisocial behaviors at an early age, they're going to be more likely to engage in a criminal career when they become an adult. It's simple. Just like we talked about social process theory. If you have positive peers, you're less likely to get in trouble because those positive peers aren't getting in trouble. If you have negative or antisocial peers and they're getting in trouble, you're more likely to get in trouble. So it's a very simple concept. Now, PBS, or problem behavior syndrome, denotes how these antisocial behaviors, when they're clustered together, so we have family dysfunction, substance abuse, smoking, precocious sexuality, early pregnancy, underachieving in school, even suicidal attempts, etc. When all of these are clustered together, that creates problems for an offender or a young person, and they're more than likely to engage in criminal behavior. In fact, it looks at crime as a social product rather than the product of other social problems. So, generally speaking, when individuals have all of these antisocial behaviors clustered together, you have crime, you have a greater propensity to commit crime, and you're going to fall victim into other problems. So it's not just crime being the problem, but if you are, again, engaged in underachievement, educational underachievement, poor health, unemployment, you might have crime, but then as you have crime, that might lead to substance abuse. It might lead to, family dysfunction because your family doesn't understand what you're doing. And these are all just interconnected. That's where the problem behavior syndrome comes into. And the other part, too, really quickly before I leave, and I had a video that I will play in class that has the students dying laughing. But I had a former probationer who was the epitome of problem behavior syndrome. Parents were, I just told a wild, crazy story about his mother when our deputies arrested her. Father showed up one time completely drunk at the probation office. The probationer I had was using fentanyl. He was violated. We locked him up a couple times. We just could not get him help. And so far, he's still alive. He's certainly a lot older now, but it was problem behavior syndrome, just completely straight up it was definitely, he was the epitome. He was the poster child of this, whole family dysfunction. So continuity of crime also gives you this idea of population heterogeneity. The best predictor of future criminality is past criminality. Population heterogeneity, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So if we're thinking about the continuity of crime, if we want to think about, can a person continue on in a criminal career? Well, they can if we look at their past. What does their past say? What does their past dictate? The past may very well dictate that this individual is going to continue in committing crimes because look at how many times in the past they've committed crimes. Why would they stop? What's going to be the catalyst to stop them or prevent them from committing crimes? Maybe it's that they got arrested. Maybe that they've gone to jail or prison several times. But what's going to be the catalyst for that? So why do people persist? In other words, why do they continue on with committing crimes? Well, persisters first come to the conclusion that crime seems like a reasonable and fruitful alternative to conventional behavior. And then they act on those beliefs. And their decision making is based on the following. First of all, crime pays. For a person that's persistent with crime, hey, crime pays. I'm getting something for nothing. I'm getting something for free. I haven't gotten caught. Crime pays. Next thing they think, there's no hope. I have no hope to do better, right? Times are hard. Economically, I'm dealing with challenges. I don't have any other way, shape, or form to get through what I'm going through. So I have no hope. I have no hope. There's nothing for me. There's no future for me. There's also the belief that I don't have any guilt. I don't feel guilty for what I'm doing. I have no sense of remorse. A person who has no guilt or no sense of remorse, that's kind of a scary person because we should at least have some values, morals, etc. We was like, I do feel guilty about doing that. I mean, I know it's not right, but I do feel guilty. I have a sense of guilt. There's a severed bond. That severed bond to society, severed bond to the family, severed bond to what's right, what's wrong. That bond is severed. So because they have this severed bond, in their opinion and in their minds, then they're okay with continuing to persist with crime. And then lastly, there's an identity transformation. They may very well start off as the good person who made a bad mistake, because people are inherently, for the most part, good, and sometimes we make bad mistakes or bad decisions, right? And they may eventually come back and say, you know what? I'm sorry for what I did. I made a mistake. It's not going to happen again. But then over time, they transform their identity to the point where it's like, you know what? It's okay. I'm okay doing this. I don't have a problem doing this. In fact, people should understand why I'm doing this. And if they don't understand why I'm doing it, then they got a problem. That's why some people persist. So then we have propensity theory, and we talked about how latent is hidden, right? Latent is another word for hidden. Propensity theory states that the propensity to commit crime is stable, but the opportunity to commit crime fluctuates over time. We all have opportunities, right, to commit crimes, right? We have opportunities to commit crime. What's stopping you from committing a crime? Social control theory. You have certain bonds, you have certain values, you have certain beliefs. That's what stops you. But we all have the propensity to commit crime. So when looking at this propensity, for starters, some people age out because as they mature, there are simply fewer opportunities to commit such acts. What creates these fewer opportunities? Well, maybe they get married, maybe they have a job. In fact, I talk about this in victimology, but the two key notable bonds which will keep someone from, persisting, or which will allow them to desist from crime, are marriage and employment. When a person gets married and when a person obtains employment, they are absolutely less likely to engage in further criminal behavior. So the tendency to commit crime is left to two powerful latent traits. And remember, hidden traits. One, how much self-control do you have? If you have low self-control, you're going to engage in risky behavior, you're going to engage in thrilling behavior, or, with low self-control, you just can't help yourself, right? That also leads to impulsivity. And then what are impulsive behaviors? Smoking, drinking, gambling, illicit sexuality or sexual behavior, reacting to a situation without thinking. Somebody, honks their horn at you and they cut you off and you flip them off, and then they're like honking, and the next thing you know, you pull out a gun and you're shooting, like just not even thinking. So in terms of crime, these are our two most powerful latent traits that we all have. We all have self-control or lack thereof, and we all can be impulsive, or we have strong convictions on keeping our impulsivity at bay. And then we have trajectory theory. Trajectory theory says there's more than one path to crime, and there's more than one class of offender. And so with trajectory theory, there's different trajectories in a criminal career. For example, age and offending trajectories. Think about how younger individuals are more likely to engage in crime than people who are older. So, when you're in that, 13, 12, 11, 12, 13 to 21, 22 age range, generally speaking, your trajectory and your path to committing crime is much, much higher than someone who is in their 20s and 30s, right? Or their 30s and 40s or 40s and 50s. When we think about personality and offending trajectories, think about where a person has antisocial personality disorder, or they're suffering from an antisocial personality, or a personality that is conducive with crime. They are more likely to engage in crime in that manner. And then lastly, the chronic offender. And there's a number of different types of offender. chronic offenders. There's some that are like low rate chronic offenders, and then there's high rate chronic offenders. But when looking at chronic offenders, these are individuals who have a greater propensity to commit crime, or they can take a different path. Like the low rate chronic offender could very well be on the path early on, but then stop. Whereas the high rate chronic offender, they're on the path early on, but they never stop, right? And then you have different chronic offenders in between. And so lastly, we talk about our pathways to crime. And we have three notable pathways. We have the authority conflict pathway, the covert pathway, and the overt pathway. Now, the authority conflict pathway focuses on how it starts at an early age. It's usually defiance. It's usually exhibiting a level of disobedience. And then, of course, there's the authority avoidance, staying out late at night, being truant, running away. Basically, think about you're not listening to authority, right? Your parents are giving you commands, and you're like, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, right? But again, it started early. Then you have the covert pathway. Minor underhanded behavior, lying, shoplifting, but it can lead to other things like property damage, and it can escalate into other forms of criminality, maybe stuff that's a little more serious. For example, larceny can be serious, and even burglary, but generally speaking, it may not escalate to very serious, right? So pickpocketing, stealing cars, stealing small items, joyriding and then dropping off the car, things like that. But it's very covert. It's very kind of hidden, so to speak, but then it will show forth itself. The one that we worry the most about is the overt pathway. And this is where it escalates to aggressive acts right at the beginning. Thinking about that person who has homicidal ideations, homicidal thoughts, a person who's aggressive right off the bat, a person who believes in physical fighting and extreme violence right away. It's very open and it's out in the open, and that is the overt pathway. So another path involves adolescent limited offenders and life course persisters. The adolescent limited offenders, these are the offenders who follow the most common criminal trajectory, in which antisocial behavior peaks in adolescence and then diminishes. Simply put, they're going to get in trouble when they're young. You probably knew somebody who got in trouble when they were young, or you yourself could be someone who got in trouble when you were young, and then they stop, right? Well, this is adolescent limited offenders. They started a simple criminal trajectory, but it peaked in adolescence and then it went away. They didn't do anything anymore. That was it. It was all over. The other side of it is the life course persisters. And these are the ones we're the most concerned with, because these are a small group of offenders who start off offending at a very early age, and then their criminal career continues well into adulthood. So for them, they started off early, but then they continued. They became, again, 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old man engaging in criminal behavior. So adolescent limited, they started early, they stopped, and that was it. Okay? They peaked in their adolescence and then it stopped. Maybe they hit 20, 21, etc. The life course persisters are the ones that we're very concerned with, because these are the ones who started off offending at an early age, and then the criminal career continued and it went well into adulthood. And so the last thing is, when we look at public policy initiatives, these are based on the premise of a developmental theory. So in public policy initiatives, want to look at how can we address treatment when it comes to kids who are at risk to becoming, adolescent limited offenders, or becoming those kids who start engaging in crime at a young age. We don't want them to continue or persist. We want to get them off that path. So one program found that an intervention that promotes academic success, social competence, and educational enhancement during elementary grades can reduce risky sexual practices and their accompanying health consequences in early adulthood. Other programs that look at multidimensional strategies and are aimed at targeting children in preschool through early elementary grades to alter the direction of their life course. So the bottom line is that we know children are the future. If you can address at-risk behavior early on, such as having well-rounded wraparound programs, that even if you have a child that is showing and displaying problematic behavior, potential criminal behavior, that you can address their needs and try to get them off that path now. It is not going to be easy, but a multi-systemic treatment approach helps. Wraparound services, and you work in anything in criminal justice, juvenile justice, wraparound services are a real thing. Wraparound services meaning that not only are we there while you're in trouble, but we're there when you're not in trouble. But it takes money and it takes dedicated people to work these programs. So the public policy implications are real. If you want to get people off a path to criminality when they're adults, you have to start back when they're kids. So that is the end of the road. And I say it's the end of the road because this is the concluding chapter on our block as it relates to criminal theories. So I really hope that over this super hyper quick creation of these different chapters of theory, these hyper condensed rather, creation of these chapters and modules on theories, that you take something away, not expected to remember all of these theories as you go through life, and certainly for you all that maybe CJ or criminology majors, if you continue on with other classes. But what I do hope is that there were some theories that resonated to you more closely than others, and that as we get ready to jump back into more specialized topics, such as our next chapter that'll be coming in the following week, will focus on interpersonal violence. We'll start there, and that's a really good and fun chapter to look at, that you will be able to see how we tie all these back to theories. Because one promise I make to you, if this is a class on theories, we're going to tie everything back to theories. So I want to thank you for tuning in. I trust that you've enjoyed our 6 chapters on theories. We went through it really quickly, but I hope that you got something out of it. Take care, stay tuned. Again, be sure to like and subscribe. Continue to follow. Follow beyond not just this course, but in other lectures that are being released simultaneously. And as always, I will see you next time. Bye now.